Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Dunn. Coming to you from my home. Yes, we have a class cancellation today, so we have to meet virtually because of the ice storm, and I guess there was some snow as well. So better safe than sorry. The university canceled all on-campus meetings. Okay, so as I said, we're having this virtual meeting, and it is Black History Month. Yes, so I have a picture of the glorious and holy Virgin Mary with her son Jesus. It's an icon or an image from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. I'm assuming Ethiopian Orthodox. It could be Ethiopian Catholic as well. From Ethiopia, which is Africa, and Mary and Jesus are portrayed in the African way, one might say. Yes, so since it is Black History Month, I promised to talk to you about Black American Catholics who are on their way to sainthood, which I did for another class. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to edit this video later and snip and paste in what I said in the previous class. Okay, so I'm not going to do it all over again. So I make sure that I hit all the points that I want to make. Okay, so I'm going to bow out for a second and I'll be right back. Now, as I promised, it is Black History Month. And so I have an icon, an image of the Blessed and Holy Virgin Mary with her son, Christ our God, from the Ethiopian Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox and the Ethiopian Catholic Church. And as you can see, they are in an African setting, or displayed in an African way. It is Black History Month, yes? So I want to talk about Black Catholics who are on their way to sainthood, these good and holy men and women in our country. I'm going to start out with this woman who is Venerable Mother Mary Lang, or her whole name was Elizabeth Clarice Lang. Let me get my... I don't know why that's not doing that, but okay. Trying to, oh, this is something else. Huh, that's weird. Get rid of this. Get rid of that. Trying to get this. Yeah, I don't know why it wouldn't come up, but anyways. Her name was Elizabeth Clarice Lang. But in religion, she took the name Mary, and she became the foundress of a religious order. So she was their mother, their foundress, and so she's commonly called Mother Mary Lang. But you can call her Venerable Mary Lang, or I guess Venerable Elizabeth Clarice Lang, whatever you want to say. I'm going to call her Venerable Mary Lang. Okay, and you can see her dates there on this picture. This is an actual picture of her in her habit. Her religious habit as a sister, a nun, and you can see her dates around 1794, and she died in 1882. She says 1794. I guess I wrote it down on my notes here. I'll have to check that out. But anyways, that's what I'm going to stick with. And she was born in Cuba, apparently, in the island of Cuba in the Caribbean. Her family may have come from Haiti. But that's a question mark. We're not sure about that. But nevertheless, she herself was born in Cuba sometime around the end of the 1700s. And in the early 1800s, Venerable Mary's family moved to the United States. They moved to Baltimore, Maryland. Okay? The South. Yes, sir. Out of the frying pan into the fire. You know what I'm saying? At least if you were black, you know? Which she was, obviously. So they moved to Baltimore, Maryland, probably because there were a lot of Catholics there. If I had to suppose or think about it, that's where the Catholic colony was in the original 13 13 colonies. Maryland, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, was set up as a colony for Roman Catholics coming from England. And so there was a large Catholic population there. And Baltimore, it was, I believe, the original diocese for the Catholic Church in the United States. So Baltimore actually has precedence over every other Catholic diocese in the United States of America because of its age. Anyways, so she went there, and she taught children from the Caribbean in her home. Caribbean, I think you might want to read black there, or African American, because during these days in the 1800s, and for a long time after, unfortunately, just non-white children, no one really cared about them. They didn't send them to school. There was a lot of slavery. Yes, most African Americans were enslaved in the southern United States. There were some free blacks here and there, but most blacks, that was not their experience. So they were working all day. They were not. They didn't want to teach them how to read and write. Their slave masters didn't want to teach them how to be educated or how to read and write. So as a black woman, she's like, let's do it ourselves. If they're not going to do it, let's do it. So she started teaching children from the Caribbean in her home. And a French priest, James Joubert, I'll just write his name just so you have it. I don't know if I'll test you on it or not. I don't know why this won't. It will show it, but it won't come. There we go. It'll show it, but it won't come up over anything. There we go. That's weird. Could be the screen recorder I'm using. Father James Joubert, right? Let me make sure I'm spelling that. Who was a French priest, encouraged her to start a school for black girls. Okay, so now you're really, really getting to the peripheries, because, teaching men is one thing, but teaching girls? And black girls? Well, that's interesting. So we asked her to start a school for black girls, and she said yes. But as a Catholic woman, which apparently she was, I'm assuming from birth she was baptized Catholic, she said yes to Father Joubert, but she also wanted to start a religious order. Okay? She felt called to commit herself more fully, more deeply to her religious faith. And so what year do I have here? 1829, Venerable Mary Lang founded a religious order of black sisters, and it really had to be that way because blacks would not have been, I don't know if there are any, I think there were female religious orders in the United States at that time, but white, and they would not have admitted black women. That's just, whether they wanted to or not, they just wouldn't do it. And this is a recurring problem we'll see when we talk about our other saints along the way, black Catholic saints. So she founded a group for specifically black women. Black Catholic women, oblates. They were called the Oblate Sisters of Providence was their name. I should spell that properly. So I can hear my notes. Okay. Oblate simply means offering, so they're offering their lives to God. So it's an offering. It's just a fancy word for offering from Latin. So the Oblate Sisters of Providence. Providence is God, is another theological term for God's care for the world, his concern, his overlooking of the world, making sure it runs correctly and, it's in existence. It's a providence. So they're offering themselves over to the providence of God, living according to his will, in another manner of speaking. This was the first group of black religious, either male or female, in the United States. Okay, and maybe I think in the whole church. I don't think even in Africa they had any specifically black religious orders, but certainly in the United States it was the first group of black religious, either male or female. Is there anything more I want to say about that? So that was a major event, and now again it won't It won't do that. I don't understand. It could be my screen recorder's messing with things. I've been having all sorts of problems with my screen recorder over the last week or so. So whatever. Anyways, so she was she was declared a servant of God, and I should go through this before I forget. There are different levels in the church's investigation of someone's holiness and whether they deserve to eventually be canonized, officially stated to be a saint of God, to be in heaven with God, and someone who can be honored and prayed to, etc. and so forth. Not that anyone who's not in heaven can do that. Everyone in heaven is a saint, but we don't know everyone who's in heaven, but the saints are kind of recognized as being such holy people before death that they're certainly in heaven. Okay, and that seems to be the case with Venerable Mary Lang. So the first level is servant of God. That's the first level, the first part of the investigation. The church, usually the local church, recognizes that one of their members was extremely holy, was an extremely good person, was in love with God, was almost like in heaven before he or she was in heaven on earth, heaven on earth, in a manner of speaking. And so they recognize that. They open up an investigation into the person's life. They recognize the holiness, that this person might have been a saint. And so the person is given the title servant of God. Okay, so when investigation begins, they, dig up the person's body, if they, where they've been buried, and they examine the body. They start investigating the person's writings, if there are any, or interviewing people who knew the person, to see if this person was truly holy, or if that was just people's opinion, and they were wrong, that maybe the person was leading a double life. Hold on one second, my stupid alarm's going off on my phone for today's class. So servant of God is the beginning of the process of canonization. They recognize that this person seemed to be a very holy person. And for some people, it might just stay at that stage. There might just not be enough evidence to proceed further. But if there is, then the person is officially declared venerable, honorable. Okay? The person can be honored, prayed to, have images made so that people can look at the image in the church, officially in the church. They are worthy of honor. They do seem to have been a holy person. So that's the next stage, venerable. They can be venerated. Okay, publicly venerated. Before that, it might be more of a private devotion, to a servant of God. If a miracle happens, we're waiting for supernatural evidence from God that this person truly was a saint. And so you're basically waiting for a miracle. You're waiting for something unusual to happen that cannot be naturally explained. So like someone has brain cancer in his head and go and prays to Venerable Mary Lang, and then, at his next doctor's appointment, the cancer has totally disappeared. And he specifically prayed for the cancer to disappear. And that's exactly what happened. And the doctor can't explain it because, cancers don't usually just poof, disappear, or a person with damaged eyes doesn't just like poof, start seeing again perfectly, stuff like that. A miracle is something that's very unusual. And there seems to be no explanation for other than the intervention of another power, a power that has power over all these things and can make the blind see and the sick be healed and stuff like that. So that's an indication. If you get a miracle, then the person, and it's confirmed, the person can be declared a blessed. They're beatified. They're declared blessed. That's the next stage. And the final stage is to be declared a saint. And that happens when another miracle occurs. So essentially you need two miracles, two interventions of God showing that in the name of this person, specifically for a certain request, it can't just be for anything, it has to be clear that there seems to have been some unusual supernatural activity involved based off of the prayers to this person. or something associated with this person. So get to then that person, the church approves it, then the church will officially declare that person a saint. So those are the 4 stages or levels of sainthood. Mother Mary is at the 2nd level. She is venerable. Okay, and she was declared venerable in 2023, so just recently. So we'll see what happens. And I ask for Mother Mary Lang's prayers for us, that she will pray for us all in this class, that God may be with us and may bless us with his love, and that also Mother Mary Lang may pray for all those Black Catholics, African American Catholics, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, as they live their journey of faith in the context of their Blackness, of their race and their ethnicity, and that God may bless them. Amen. Okay. I'm back. Oh, that's weird. It seems like my camera is not syncing with my motion, my mouth, but it really doesn't matter. I wonder if I can change the settings. I mean, I'm curious if I can. I don't think I can. No. Anyways, it's fine. So we're going to talk about Hinduism. We're entering into our first actual religion. Hinduism. You can see there a picture of Indra. I believe it's Indra. Or no, not Indra. I'm sorry. He's a male god. Is it Mahadevi or the Maha something? Anyways, but it's India kind of pictured as a goddess, as a divine being there. In the colors of India, green and kind of saffron or orange and stuff like that, and stuff like that. Anyways. So I thought it was an appropriate image to start with, since we're going to talk about India, or Hinduism, and Hinduism has so much to do with India, as will be obvious. There's a map of the modern country of nation state of India. Hinduism has 5,000 plus years of history. And with Judaism, Hinduism is one of the most ancient of the world's living religions, okay? Because there are other old religions, but they're dead, or they're not practiced anymore. But with Judaism, Hinduism is one of the oldest. It's so old that it has no founder that we know of, and no official creed, no official statement of belief that everyone has to believe to be a Hindu. In fact, for Hinduism, or for those who believe in Hinduism, Hinduism has always been. It's since the beginning of existence. But archaeologically, we can find evidence for Hinduism at least 5,000 years ago. According to before I get that, Mother India, that's the picture I showed you of. Mother India, Hinduism and India, the country of India, are very closely linked. Okay, with Mother India. India is like the mother or the fatherland of the people. So at times, maybe oftentimes, there can be hardly any distinction in people's minds between being a Hindu and actually being an Indian person of Indian descent or Indian nationality, which can make it difficult on what they call minority groups in India, like Muslims or Christians, because some people might wonder, well, are they truly Indian? Because, Islam didn't originate in Mother India, nor did Christianity. Even though they've both been there for a long time, they're not really Indian, because they're not Hindu. According to the Pew Research Center, which is a bunch of sociologists. Right now, I'm going to have to end the show so I get to my notes. The Pew Research Center, which is, basically a sociological group which does all sorts of research on a variety of issues, politics, society, but they do a lot of stuff on religion, which is very helpful to me, someone like me, in my field. And according to their statistics from 2015, there are circa around 1.03 billion Hindus. So that would be around 1,030,000,000 Hindus in the world, mostly located in India and the nation of India, as you might expect, or in Nepal, which is a neighboring country. And until recently, or by recently I mean like maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, was the only Hindu kingdom on the planet. They had a king, they had a monarchy. It was a Hindu monarchy until it got, well, it's still kind of there, but it was almost like an absolute monarchy. But they had a communist rebellion going on, and then I think one of the princes in the monarchy shot up the royal family and killed a whole bunch of the royal family, and they're now, I think, just a constitutional monarchy where the monarchy has very little power. But anyways, so there are a lot of Hindus in Nepal and Bangladesh, as you might also have expected, since it's surrounded. Bangladesh is pretty much surrounded by India, although it does have a border with Burma or Myanmar. Where does the word come from? The word Hindu derives literally from the geography. It comes from this river, the Indus River, that you can see flowing here through the northern part of, well, it's disputed, as you can see from the dotted lines, it's disputed between Pakistan and India. But, let's say it goes through northern India, but most of this river actually runs through Pakistan, which is a majority Muslim nation. It's not Hindu at all, okay? Which is kind of interesting, that the name Hindu comes from this river, which in Sanskrit, the ancient language Sanskrit, was called the Sindhu. The Indus River, the Sindhu, which simply means river. That's all it means, the river. And it's where we get our word Indus River from. And this word, Sanskrit word, went into Iranian. Iran is over here. You can't see it on the map, but it entered into the Iranian language as Hindu. In Iranian, they frequently drop the S's. They I guess you could say they aspirate them or whatever, but they become H's. So Hindu, which came into English as Hindu. So that's where we get Hindu. And Hindu, the word was meant to describe anyone who dwelt around the Indus River. Okay, so they were the people who were living along the Indus River, and they became Hindus. Okay? And, well, actually, before I go on let me go back, just because, how do I go back? There we go. Before I go on in the PowerPoint, because I don't want to confuse anybody. And it was the Muslims, when Islamic armies entered into northern India, they used that word Hindu from the Iranian Hindu to describe anyone who was not a Muslim. So all the natives of India were simply called Hindus as a specific religious group to describe the religious group that was not Muslim. Okay? Or at least it was, I shouldn't say not Muslim, but those who were the natives of the area, the dwellers by this river. This occurs in the 1200s AD when Muslims from Iran invade northern India. And so they want to distinguish Islam from the natives who are not practicing Islam. So he called them that. And then Europeans just took that over as a technical religious term in the 1800s. But Hindus never actually called themselves or called their religion Hinduism. I mean, they might now in modern times, but traditionally Hinduism is referred to by them as the Sanatana Dharma or Santana Dharma, which means the eternal Dharma or the eternal law. Okay, we encountered the word Dharma before when I talked about religion itself, and I talked about how elastic this term Dharma is. It can mean a lot of things. It can mean law, ritual, custom, just a way of life, ethics. Here it's more being used more in a religious aspect, I think, or ritualistic, and Sanatana means eternal, without beginning. So the law that is without beginning. So their religion, Hinduism, is eternal. It has no beginning. It's actually in Hinduism, you're experiencing the true law of reality of the universe. But the word Hinduism, I'll get to that in a second. Let me get, come back to this in a second. The word Hinduism is really an umbrella term that encompasses a family of religious beliefs. It's an extremely complicated religion. I mean, are all religions complicated? Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm a Christian, and I'm still hitting only the tip of the iceberg of Christianity. I'm always learning something more about my religion. And I know even less about these other religions, even though I do know a lot more than you do, I would imagine. Unless you are a Hindu, then you're the expert, and you can teach me. And I'm willing to learn. But Hinduism, in comparison even to other religions, Hinduism is an extremely complex religion, encompassing a large group of beliefs. So what I'm doing is just trying to bring some order to this. Okay, but you have to realize that what it might be on the ground, if you ever went to India or met Indians here in the United States, and we have a number of them, especially in New Jersey. A lot of Indians have settled in Jersey City, have emigrated and settled in Jersey City, New Jersey. I once visited my brother. He was at the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom. That's how I became a Leicester City football fan. Although they stink this season. They are really bad and probably going to get relegated from the Premier League, probably. Nevertheless, my brother went to Leicester University in Leicester City, and that's one outside of India. That's one of the main emigration points for Indians in Leicester City. Tons of Indian restaurants all over the place, on every corner, street corner. And that's where I encountered Indian food and fell in love with it. So, I mean, if you meet Indians, I mean, you might be like, well, that's not what I learned in class from Dr. Dunn, or that's a little different. Well, yes, you have to understand there's a great amount of diversity in this ancient religion. Okay, and in a way of understanding it, Hinduism tries to stuff everything into its religion. You'll find just about everything. Okay. The only thing that seems to unite Hinduism is its origins in Mother India, that it comes from India. India is the place of your father, and Hinduism is therefore the religion of your ancestor, of your father. And so we have here a quotation from a man named Radhakrishnan, who was the Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Pali Radhakrishnan, who was the second president of the Republic of India, also called the Union of India, who said that Hinduism is more of a culture than a creed. It's more of a culture, a way of life, than a statement of, a list of beliefs that you have to have. Okay, because there are Hindus that might believe certain things that other Hindus don't believe. However, we will see that there are certain non-negotiables for Hinduism. Okay, there are certain, because then if nothing's non-negotiable, then you don't have anything. It's just can't even say you have any kind of religion or anything to hang your hat on. But there are some things that are non-negotiable about the religion. Even though a lot of religious studies scholars will talk about Hinduisms in the plural, to kind of make their point that, there's a great amount of variety in how people practice the religion and believe in it. Okay. Let's get into some of the history. I like to do a little historical discussion of each religion for the most part. Hinduism has a long religious history, so I'm going to have to really kind of hop, skip, and jump through it. So let's start with what we know about the origins of Indian civilization, and we start with the Harappa culture that's datable to around the 3000s BC. So we start with the civilization that developed, or civilizations, one might say, that developed up and down the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan, which archaeologists call the Indus Valley Civilization, and they date it from around 3000 BC to 1500 BC. In the 1920s and 1930s, and they call this the Harappa culture. The Harappa after Harappa, which is one of the major cities, the name for one of the major cities along the Indus River. There was another one that you see there on the PowerPoint as well, Mohenjo-Daro, which is also in modern-day Pakistan. That's also another significant site. The Harappa culture flourished, I guess, from my PowerPoint, it seems to be from circa 2600 to 1700 BC. And it was only in the 1920s and the 1930s AD that there were excavations in that region of the Indus Valley in modern-day Pakistan and India, and it uncovered these city cultures, these urban civilizations that seem to have some kind of religious and political unity and a high development of civilization. They had well-planned cities, like you can see here, the Harappa city and Mohenjo-Daro. I believe this picture is of Harappa. But it could be Mohenjo-Daro. I wonder. Let me look at my notes if I put a little note for myself. I did not. And I didn't put any note with the picture. Okay, so I could be wrong. I think this is the city from the archaeological site of the city of Harappa. And you can see here a large bathing pool. And this, what scholars think, archaeologists think, was a large bathing pool. So what might that have, they have to interpret and think about, well, what does that mean if we're right about this? Well, it could mean that, it was used for religious purposes, for cleansing, ritual purification. Okay. Could just be that they like baths. They like to go swimming, they wanted a place to go swimming. Don't know, but anyways, that's what archaeologists think, and so that seems to be something distinctive about the culture. The presence of these baths. You also have something interesting that they found at Mohenjo-Daro, which is called the Pashupati seal, which is an image of a horned male figure. They know it's a male because he has an erect penis sticking up. Anyways, a lot of the pagan religions love the penis. And Hinduism is no different. So it's a horned male figure. What appears, so you can see the horns here, appears to have, or appears to be sitting in a yogic position, as you might stereotypically think of a yoga position with the legs crossed. It also seems to have three faces, one looking forward and faces to the side. I don't know if that implies there's a fourth face looking back. And so they found this seal. A seal is kind of like a signature, okay, an imprint that you would put on something to indicate like who owns it or the name of a person or something. It's an identification. And you see there are other images, there are other carvings or inscriptions here. We don't know if this is writing or not. There's intense scholarly debate because they found all sorts of what appears to be writing in Harappa and I guess in Mohenjo-Daro as well. And but they can't decipher it. They don't know what it says if it is writing, but it seems to act like writing, but they're still not sure if it's writing or it's pictographs, just pictures that are used to communicate meaning. It's not clear yet. We don't know. So it would be nice if we did know, because it could then tell us something about what this is, because there are other figurines found, again, with a male god with three faces and horns, and scholars have posited or guessed that this might be an early representation of the Hindu god Shiva, who is called Lord of the Animals or Lord of the Beasts. Lord of the Beasts. Pashupati means Lord of the Beasts. And Shiva becomes later on in Hinduism a major god, not at this period of time, but later on. So they wonder if this is an early representation of one of the three major Hindu gods, because he's surrounded by animals. That seems to be a rhinoceros. This seems to be an elephant. This seems to be a tiger. Okay. This is I guess a water buffalo. I'm not sure what this is. But this figure seems to be surrounded by animals. But it's not clear. Could it be the god Brahma, who is another god who later becomes popular in Hinduism, although not so popular, not as popular as Shiva, who also is depicted with three or four faces, with multiple faces on his head? Could this be Brahma? I'm not sure. Could this just be an example of someone doing yoga? We don't know. We do not know. But it's tantalizing. It's very interesting. Okay? It may not be any of these things at all. Without knowing the language or the writing, you have no clue. Okay, now we enter into what's called the Vedic, or the pre-classical period, which covers around 1500 years before Christ to 500 years before Christ. Okay, and what makes this period notable is the what appears to be the arrival of a group called the Aryans. The Aryans, and no, I'm not talking about some neo-Nazi skinheads. Okay, although you're gonna find out now why they call themselves Aryans. Anyways, we have what's called the Aryan invasion, or the Aryan migration theory. Migration is the preferred term, from a group of people who, from their writings in Sanskrit that we have called the Vedas, that's where we get the Vedic, and we'll talk about the Vedas more later on. They describe themselves as the Aryas, the noble ones. We are the noble ones, the Aryas, from which we get the word Aryan. Okay, the Aryans. The first person to propose this theory was our friend Friedrich Max Müller, who, as I told you in a previous class, was a linguistic expert in languages, especially Eastern languages, one of them being the ancient language, Indian language, Sanskrit, which is a dead language, but it's related to Latin and Greek, ancient Greek, which are also dead languages. They continue on in their modern forms, but they're not the same as the classical languages. And through his study of Sanskrit, he noticed that there seemed to be a connection between the languages of northern India, that a connection that extended all the way across Western Europe. Okay, there was some kind of linguistic connection. But there was no connection to what were considered the local languages that you mainly find in southern India. Okay, there was no linguistic connection there, apparently. So, I mean, you can see this is called the Indo-European language family, and just, a variety of languages from, Persian and Iran, Armenian, here in the Caucasus Mountains, Russian, the Slavic languages, Polish, etc., Greek, Latin, I mentioned, and all the languages that developed from that, like English, the Germanic languages, you have the Romance languages from Latin, Greek, Albanian, okay, just all across. So, based on word study or language study, scholars think that there was a group of people who lived in the Caucasus, around the regions of the Caucasus Mountains. Caucasian, anybody? Maybe lighter skinned people, maybe white people, who then migrated across down into India, migrated across over into Western Europe. Okay. They didn't migrate to Greenland. Greenland is just Greenland and Iceland. They're mentioned because Denmark owns Greenland, or Greenland is a separate part of Denmark, actually, a self-governing part of Denmark. Okay, and so Danish is a Germanic language, which ultimately derives from Indo-European. Okay, so there's this connection between the language Sanskrit that was used by the Aryans, the people who wrote this Vedic literature, and the literature that they wrote, that the connection is not evident with the native-speaking peoples of the subcontinent and the South. And so his idea was basically based on linguistic and literary considerations, from studying the ancient Hindu writings that were written in this language, Sanskrit. Okay, and others, there was no racial element here. Okay, he wasn't basing it on race or how people looked, but other people took his idea, other scholars picked up on his insight, and they later introduced a racial element, that the Aryans were noble because they were of a lighter skin, than the darker-skinned native Indians who spoke the Dravidian languages. They belong to a language family called Dravidian, which are totally unrelated to the northern Indian languages, which are Indo-European. So that's where you get the racist element. So it's a very, I'll tell you this, it's a theory. It does seem to have linguistic support. And also literary support in the Vedic writings. But I just want to caution you that you have to be very careful with it, because it's, people in India and Indians could be very touchy about this, very touchy about saying that anything came from outside of India. The general belief is that everything developed within India. Hinduism is a self-contained reality. There was no outside, or almost no outside influence. And that doesn't seem to be borne out by the linguistic evidence or some of the literary evidence and archaeological evidence. But people don't like that. Especially if you're in India. They don't like and it could be, people can get very angry about talking about this theory. So you just have to be careful with it. But it is generally accepted. I mean, take apart the racist element, and that's where we get like the Nazi skinheads, the Indo-Aryans, because the Germans thought, well, we're the true Aryans, we're the true Caucasians, the true original Indo-Europeans. And so that's why they appropriated the word Aryan. So once you remove the explicitly racist aspect of the theory, which came later, and just adhere to what the evidence is, that there does seem to be clearly a relationship, then they might have something. So circa 2000 BC to 1500 BC, the belief is that these Indo-European tribes, called the Noble Ones, or the Aryas and the Sanskrit writings, migrated down and moved into the northern Indian subcontinent, and they brought their language and their culture. They were probably semi-pastoral nomads, people that wandered around with their animals from pasture land to pasture land so that the animals could feed. And they just decided to settle down. If the language is any indication, it does seem to derive from this area above Iran, okay, with the linguistic references. The evidence is mainly from the Vedas. Let me just go to the next PowerPoint and see if I'm back. Is mainly from the Vedas, which are the sacred writings of Hinduism. Let me write down the word just so you can see it. We'll talk a lot about the Vedas later. These are the religious texts, which are basically a series of hymns, a big grouping of hymns, songs to be sung to the gods during the worship ceremonies used in Hinduism. So these songs would be used to worship the gods. It's basically what the Vedas are. So they were written in Sanskrit, as I've told you, which is an ancient language. It's a dead language. It's still used in the Hindu religion, but not commonly used amongst people as an everyday language. And as I showed you, it's part of this language family that stretches across to Europe. And the Vedas, if you read the Vedas, which I have not fully, I'm relying on the experts here, the Vedas describe a very different religious picture than what we later find, what we find in the Indus Valley civilization or in later Hinduism. The religion the religious practices and beliefs that are described in the Vedic literature is much more in line with what we've come to discover about Indo-European religious customs than later Hinduism. So, for example, and I have a little picture for this. Let me get my picture here. Now I have to find the picture. Give me a moment. Pictures. Okay, I drew a picture many, many years ago. I don't know why, but it actually has come in handy because it reminds me of information that I can forget. So where are we here? It's in with all of this. There we go. Picture. Which one do I want here? There we go. Okay. I made this picture years ago, and it's meant to show the difference. The bottom part here is Vedic religion, and the top part here is what scholars believe was the native Indus Valley type of religion. So one difference is the language. Here's written Sanskrit, and here's one of the Dravidian languages. I forget which religion. It might be Tamil or something. I forget which actual language it is, but this is the writing system is different, just to show you that. The Aryans were known for nature worship. So God was, the gods they worship were storm gods, gods of the cloud and thunder and lightning, gods of the moon and the sun. So nature worship, nature gods, whereas the Indus Valley one, they think, was more focused just on many gods, that were kind of spirits, I guess. The Aryans were big on fire sacrifice and sacrificing animals, especially horses. So that's this poor little horsey that I drew. I love horsies. Don't hurt the horsies, people. Leave them alone. Let them live their horsey life, But they like to sacrifice horses. So, of course, they had a priesthood. Priests who did this. I did not put this on the picture, but Soma. They involved themselves, or part of their religious practice was to drink a sacred alcohol called soma, which if I could get this to come up, yes, called soma, which scholars are still not sure exactly what it was made out of, but it was some intoxicating drink that they used in religious ceremonies, whereas you didn't have that, apparently, in the Indus Valley region. Oh yeah, the Indus Valley, as we know from the bath, or we assume from the baths that they had in their cities, they were big on water and water purification rites. Forget why I put this here. Temples. Maybe because of temples, I think. Okay, so they were more focused on ritual purification and water. That was a big deal. And the caste system. The newcomers saw themselves as better. The newcomers, and this is where the racial idea comes in, the newcomers who were apparently of a lighter skin than the locals who were darker skinned. So the newcomers saw themselves as better than the natives because they had a lighter skin, and so they initiated or created a caste or class system to separate themselves out from the darker skinned natives, Indian natives, to stay apart from them. So you have 4 castes, which again we'll talk about later. I don't know if they had a caste in the Indus Valley. Not sure. So I put a question mark there. Okay, so those are just some indications of what scholars think were the differences. And which really show up in the Vedic literature. Other things they mention, like I think using iron weapons and having chariots and stuff like that, and horses, I think too, which were not native to the region at the time. This shows that these come from outside. These would not be like in the later Hindu literature when they have the gods, running around in chariots and stuff like that. Chariots were not apparently native to the Indus Valley civilization or to the region of India, so they were obviously brought in from without. Okay, so there was some influence. So as I said, the theory is much controverted. Most archaeologists, or many archaeologists and studies of India, Indologists, would reject it outright, especially those in India. They don't like the idea that things came from outsiders. And let's bring in genetics. Can we find any genetic markers or traces? And there doesn't seem to be. There doesn't seem to be any genetic markers left. If there was a migration and a mixing with the local culture, or settling of these people into northern India. Okay, I'm just looking at my notes. I want to see if I want to say anything else. Yeah, the archaeology is inconclusive. I mean, the archaeology can't say whether there was a full-scale migration or it was indigenous development. You can find evidence for both of these. The language is the best evidence. The Indus Valley, also the fact that the Indus Valley civilization does not seem to be aware of the religious practices that are common to the Vedas. The Indus Valley is a city. They're city dwellers. They're big cities, whereas the image of life shown in the Vedas is of pastoral people living in villages, small towns, moving around with animals and stuff like that. Oh, wait a second. I do have a note here. 2019. Oh, okay, good. I updated my notes. 2019 genetic studies. 2 genetic studies were done and proved that there was the introduction of DNA from people of the steppe grasslands of Eastern Europe. So this is Eastern Europe here, and these are all, a steppe is just a flat plain of grass land. Okay, so there does seem to be evidence in the DNA from people of northern India that link them to people over here in Eastern Europe. Okay, which is right in the region where scholars think that Indo-European developed. Okay, so there is, forget what I said before, there is genetic evidence. I just didn't see it in my notes. Okay. Now we move on to the classical period, 500 BC to 1000 AD. Okay, so 1500 years. Woo! What happens here? Well, I got to jam a lot of stuff, information into this period. A lot happens. Well, I mean, the priestly group or the priestly class was largely in control of the religion from, around 600 BC, thereabouts, to 400 AD. But there are protest movements against the priestly ritualistic religions because it's not doing anything for anybody. Okay, you see some kind of reform movements and renewal movements arise during this period because people are dissatisfied, especially because the rituals become overloaded. I mean, they're so complicated, so complex. And remember, people had to learn these through memorization for the most part, okay, until the Vedas were written down. But they were learning it mainly through memorization. And even with the Vedas, even with written texts, you still have to be taught them how to pronounce things and how to sing them because they're hymns, they're songs. And they're just too much, even people can't remember them. They can't remember all the details that they have to perform the rituals properly. So people are becoming dissatisfied with the Vedic religion. And some people, move away from it. And so you have what are called protest movements, like you have Jainism, which is still exists today. It is a small religion from India. It's mostly located in India. There are about 4, maybe 5 million members in the world nowadays. And it was founded, it's according to their tradition, they had a whole series of founders, but the last founder his name was a man named Vardhamana who lived in the 500s BC. He lived, the official dates are he lived from around 599 to 5. Actually, I can do that, can't I? Let me do this. Yes. He lived from 599 to 527 BC. Okay. He's also called Mahavira, but that's a title. It means, I think, great champion or great conqueror. We might, if I end early in the course, good luck, I might talk about Jainism because it's a fascinating little religion, and old. But anyways, Mahavir, the great conqueror, Vardhamana brought about this religion which rejected the Vedas. It rejected the Vedic writings. They typically didn't pray anymore to the gods of the Vedas. They were seen as unnecessary. Okay, you basically had to work out your own liberation or freedom from the cycle of death and rebirth that we all go through, they believe. Although they do appropriate a lot of the gods of Hinduism. So if you go to a Jain temple, you will sometimes see gods of, Hinduism. But mostly you'll see statues of their great teachers, especially Vardhamana, but other teachers as well. There's a Jain shrine up where I live in New Jersey. They recreated this whole shrine from India, apparently exactly. And it's in, where is it? Is it by Blairstown or Hackettstown? Maybe Hackettstown, New Jersey, down that way. I went there one time and I took some video of it. I've got to go back and take video because the video got, I lost the video. I have some pictures, but the video I was using got all messed up. Anyways, I got to go back because it was very interesting. So Jainism. So we do have Jains in the United States. Not a lot, but we do have Jains in the area up in New Jersey. So this was kind of a reform movement, a reactionary movement against the sacrifices and the ritualism and the structure, like also the caste structure of classical Hinduism. Okay, caste structure was rejected by Jains. Okay, so this made them different. We also have, actually, I guess I have to, whoops, put that away. I don't want to do that. So I turn this off. You see here. Don't use something when you haven't used it before, people. You'll get into trouble. There we go. Buddhism. The Buddha. And the Buddha dates from, as we'll find out when we study Buddhism, there are different dates for the Buddha. We actually might, in recent years, through archaeology, we might be coming to a closer knowledge of when this man really lived. But circa 563 to 483 BC. 483 BC. His name is Gautama Siddhartha, who's called the Buddha. I don't know why I say it's complicated. I think it may be complicated about his dates, because we have two different sets of dates for the Buddha. I'm not exactly sure when he lived, but we might be surer than we were through archaeology now than we were 10 years ago. And he becomes enlightened. That's what Buddha means. It means one who has been awakened, enlightened. So the Buddha was woke before there was woke. There's nothing new under the sun, people. You could call him the woke. He was the woke, the Buddha. Gautama Siddhartha. Gautama is his family name. Siddhartha is his personal name. They give the family name first in Eastern and Asian cultures. So Gautama Siddhartha. Okay. And also the Buddha, or Siddhartha, rejected the Vedas, like Jainism. And in fact, Buddhism was kind of in competition with Jainism. And there are a lot of similarities between the two. They were both kind of monastic movements. People would leave normal life and devote themselves to meditation and stuff like that. They were ascetic. And so they rejected the Vedas. Buddhism also rejected the caste system and stuff like that. So they challenged the status quo of Hindu religion. Did I mention that? I don't think I put it on the PowerPoint. Huh. Interesting. Let me just see if I did. No, come on. I have to figure out how to get rid of. I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of this once I don't want to use it anymore. Nope. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I didn't do that. All right, so I'll skip over this. There was a reaction. Both Buddhism and Jainism reached the widest growth, but there was a reaction against this. There was a reform, I shouldn't say reform. Jainism and Buddhism, I could say, were reform. Bhakti is a renewal movement. There was a renewal movement in response to these religions or these movements, Jainism and Buddhism, which seem to reject traditional Hinduism. And so there was a refocus on the gods. Okay, in some cases, Buddhism was forcibly suppressed. to the point that, like starting around the 1000 AD, Buddhists were suppressed by the Hindu majority, to the point that there are very few Buddhists in modern day India. They were basically wiped out or forced out of India. So it's kind of funny that Buddhism started in India, but it didn't grow there. It died there in a way. So people developed devotions to the gods, bhakti, devotion to a god, and that was the response. Also, the Aryan religion of the Vedas became more Hinduized or Indianized, so that Vedic gods were replaced or associated with older pre-Aryan gods that were more native to the subcontinent. So, for example, in the Vedas, it talks a lot about this god Rudra, who's the god of storms. Trying to undo. Okay. Okay, here we go. This god Rudra was a storm god, thunderstorms, I guess. He's the shaker, the thunderer. And he was associated with Shiva, the god Shiva, who's hardly ever mentioned in the Vedas. It's a god of very minor importance in the Vedas. Rudra is mentioned a lot. Shiva, apparently the native god of India, is barely mentioned. But this is overturned during this period of time where they Indianized the Vedas, and now Shiva is called Shiva Rudra, Shiva the Thunderer. He's given this epithet, Thunderer, which is Rudra's name, and people forget about Rudra, and they remember Shiva in honor of Shiva. So that's what's going on there. So they just replace the god with the other one, the Aryan god with the Indian god. So let's go back to this. Okay, so now we're coming out of, Buddhism, yes, good. Coming out of the classical period, and we are into the medieval period, the Middle Ages, which for India begins in the 1200s. The Middle Ages for Europe, as you know, traditionally begins around the 5th century AD, but for Hinduism begins around the 1200s AD and goes until the 1700s. Okay, this is where, by this time, Buddhism is pretty much dead in India. The only place that Buddhism survives is in Sri Lanka, which you could say is part of India. Now it's its own separate country, but Buddhism moves north and northeast into other areas of the world, and basically dies out as anything in India. Some cases literally, as I said, because there was suppression and oppression by the Hindu majority. Now we have Islam, okay? And as we'll learn later when we talk about the history of Islam, in the 7th century AD, about 500 years before this, a new religion developed in Arabia, in the Middle East, called Islam, or we call Islam. And it was always on the outskirts of India here, where we have modern-day Pakistan, okay? It moved over to northern India, but didn't really enter into. It was always on the outskirts in eastern Pakistan or Afghanistan due to the Islamic military efforts after the death of the founder of Islam, Muhammad. Or if you're Muslim, you don't believe he's the founder of Islam. He's just the prophet who receives the message. God's the founder of Islam. But it's another cup of coffee, and we'll talk about that when we do Islam. Nevertheless, Muslim armies push over to the Indus River, and they basically stop there for a period of time. But then in the 13th century, the 1200s, they start to make huge inroads into northern India. As you can see on this map, they establish the Sultanate of Delhi existed from 1206 to 1526. Okay, so the Mamluks. And these names, I think, are after the leaders Okay, I think it was Mamluk. So, there's the Mamluk dynasty, the Khilji, the Tughlaq, and the Lodi dynasty. So, yeah, the Muslim armies cross over and they conquer a large portion of northern India. Okay, they get an even larger portion after that. Most of India by the 1300s, and then it's reduced in the 1400s near the end to a smaller portion. But you can see the expansion and the contraction of what's called the Sultanate of Delhi, because Delhi was a major city. I mean, it's still a major city. It's still in India. You have Delhi, but you also have New Delhi, which is the capital. So this major city, and a sultan is simply an Arabic word for ruler. So that's all it means. And any authority figure is a sultan, is a sultan. Okay, an authority is a ruler. So that's all it means. During this time, when Muslims took over a lot of India at one point, Buddhists and Hindus, the Buddhists who remained, and Hindus were generally persecuted by their Islamic rulers. And this helped spell the ultimate end for Buddhist influence in India. And after the fall, this is where cows come in. Did I mention that? Okay, I'll mention that in a second. What succeeded the Muslims didn't leave after this Delhi Sultanate. They actually have another empire, the Mughal Empire, from the Mongolians, who were from the north, who had converted to Islam, and that empire extends from they conquer the Sultanate of Delhi, the Delhi Sultanate, and then they conquer and rule from 1526 until 1858, when I believe it's the British who take full control. Okay, so the Mughal Empire, or the Mughal is another way to spell it. Hinduism responds to this because the Muslims are their overlords, and the Muslims eat meat. I mean, they won't eat pork. Muslims are kind of like Jews in that they have certain foodstuffs that are taboo to them. So Muslims don't eat pork. They don't eat or they don't drink alcohol. Stuff like that, but they will eat cows, and that's kind of where the whole cow thing comes in. Vegetarianism, not eating meat at all, and also venerating cows develops in this period. Okay, so you don't really find it apparently in the ancient religion. It comes as a reaction against the religious beliefs and practices of the Muslims who are now controlling the Hindus. Kind of like they're a protest against this. So they won't eat meat. Some people won't eat meat. So there's vegetarianism, and they venerate cows to emphasize their purity as opposed to the Muslims. Okay. 1500s. Here come the Europeans. Get back to that. Here come the Europeans, and I have the map here of India in 1700, and maybe I should make that larger so you can see it. You make it larger. There we go. Okay. The 1500s. Here come the Europeans. Around 1510, the Portuguese explorers established a colony in Goa, which they actually held as part of Portugal until India took it away in 1961. And it's up here. Oh, no, there it is. There's Goa right there. Okay, so until 1961 they had this. 1510 till 1961 the Indian Army invaded and took it back. So you can see Europeans show up during this colonial period, the time of colonization, and they establish all sorts of colonies. And see how diverse it is. I mentioned the Portuguese with Goa, but the English were there. You have some English colonies. The French were there and had some colonies. And it's kind of cool because places like in the south here, like Pondicherry, here's Pondicherry, and is it Bangalore as well, or just Pondicherry? But anyways, they still have like the French street signs. Stuff is still in the French language. When France finally turned over Pondicherry in these places to India in the last century, I believe. There were Dutch colonies. Up here. brown. There's a Dutch colony, the Netherlands, and Danish, the Danes. Look at here, yellow, Danish. There's a Danish colony up here. Okay, don't think they lasted very long. Okay, so the Europeans show up and start establishing colonies. Not necessarily, again, colonialism was complex. I mean, they didn't necessarily establish them by force, although they kept them by force. Sometimes it was just they made a contract with whoever the local Raja or local ruler was, and they say, can we lease this territory from you for a certain amount of years? And, eventually they've been there for so long, it was just like, okay, this is ours now. This is part of Portugal. We're not leaving. It's kind of what happened with the British. So we enter the period of Hindu revivalism, and beginning with the 1700s. The British Raj. The British eventually, in their colonies, they start making all sorts of agreements with local rulers, and they gain a lot of control over a large part of the Indian subcontinent. The other colonies are there. The French still have their colonies, the Portuguese, but they're obviously hemmed in and overwhelmed by the British presence. As you can see here in this map, everything that's red is pretty much under direct British control. Okay? All these yellow parts, the yellow are, as it shows here on the map, native states and territories. Okay? So red is British controlled, and those that are pinkish are maybe not directly controlled by the British, but as it says here, their territories permanently administered by the government of India, which was essentially the British Empire. But this is something, that is interesting because, people can get a false sense that, the British controlled all of India. India was Britain's and stuff like that. It's not exactly true, actually. I mean, the British did not control, as you can see from this, there were still large parts of India that were not controlled by the British. Nepal was not, all up here, over here, okay? Not directly. They were controlled by Indians, by Indian people who are of Indian ethnicity. Now, they had entered into agreements, I'm sure, with the British government. And so, they were kind of, maybe you could say they were puppet states of the British, although the British didn't directly control them as it did in the red areas. Okay. But again, as I said, history is much more complicated and complex than we think. Yeah. Okay. So, did British control India? Yes. They take over. And there's a reaction because you have all these Christian missionaries. Well, you have Christian missionaries with the arrival of the Portuguese. You have Catholic missionaries, but also with the arrival of other European groups like the British. You have, mission societies, and they send all sorts of missionaries into India. So there's a reaction against Western colonialism and Christian missionaries. And so, again, this is in this period of time, which I really should correct my PowerPoint. That annoys me. I'll come back later and do it, but I'm not going to do it now. It's called when the British were in control, it's called the British Raj. The word Raj means, oh, darn it. Sorry. The word Raj means rule. Okay. So a Raja is a ruler. Okay. So the British rule, the British Raj. And so Hindu leaders try to reform Hindu ideas in response to mainly Christianity and the Christian missionaries. They're worried that they're losing people to Christianity. People are converting to Christianity out of Hinduism. And so they try to reform. There are people who try to reform Hinduism. They try to say, like, well, we don't really worship the idols or the statues that are in our temples. These are just really images, representations of the gods. They're not really inhabited by the spirit of the god and become the god itself, And they even try to assert monotheism. There are many gods in Hinduism, but ultimately there's only one main god that they're all representing. They're all just faces of the one god. So they are trying to kind of appropriate Christian ideas or attitudes and religion and make Hinduism more palatable. They're also reacting against the outside influences. They're trying, because they're conquered peoples. They're colonized, and which is not something that they like. But so they try to emphasize the superiority of Indian wisdom over the West. They try to say, hey, look at our religious writings. Look at our philosophical writings. Look at our culture, our civilization. It's as old, if not older, than a lot of your European stuff. So we're superior to the West. Okay? We're superior to the Western, even to your Western religions. What does Jesus have to teach us that we didn't know 5,000 years ago? Or why do we need your Bible when we've got our Vedas or our philosophical writings or our myths? We don't need Islam. We don't need Christianity. Your foreign religion. We already have religious wisdom. So that's kind of like what's going on in Hindu revivalism. And it's still kind of going on. And actually it's gotten kind of fundamentalistic in some ways. Because, Christians and Muslims find themselves persecuted sometimes. Like, for example, it's forbidden. Forbidden, just cannot try to convert people from Hinduism in India. It's like trying to make them German. You just, because again, Hindu means India, basically, the Indus River. This is Mother India. And so to try to change someone from worshiping the gods of Hinduism to worshiping, say, Jesus or someone, it's beyond religious. It becomes political, it becomes racial, all sorts of stuff. It's like, as I said, it's like trying to tell a person, oh, you have to become like a white man to be truly saved. And so Christianity, for example, has been in India for 2,000 years, according to the tradition. Maybe not that long, but the traditional date is about 2,000 years ago. Certainly, Christianity has been in India longer than Islam. And yet, Christianity is still talked about and viewed as a foreign religion. It's brought by white men, brought by Europeans. It's not native to Mother India. Therefore, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. Islam seems to be more acceptable, but not so much. Okay, as you might have read in the textbook, the Ayodhya Mosque, which was destroyed by a Hindu mob. Okay, it's in the textbook. Maybe I'll talk more about this, but in class, but maybe I won't. The Ayodhya Mosque, which was built, I think in the 1300s, it says in your textbook, I think it's the 1300s, was built over a Hindu temple by Muslims when they were in power. And I think it was in the 1980s. It was at the 1990s. Well, in the last 30 or 40 years, a group of Hindus got together and they destroyed it. They said, we want it back. We want our temple back. That's where our temple was. And you destroyed it and built your mosque all those centuries ago. We want it back. So they destroyed the mosque. And for like 2 decades now, the issue has been in the courts about what to do about it. They haven't been able to come to it. They weren't able to come to a decision. The Muslims, wanted whatchamacallit, they wanted compensation. They wanted, the people who did it to be punished and to be able to rebuild their mosque. Well, a lot of Hindus didn't want that to happen. So eventually, I think it got to the Supreme Court of India, which decided, no, we'll rebuild a Hindu temple on that site, and we'll have a mosque nearby built. So, they try to, kind of like split the baby in half. So try to make both sides happy. And they finished building the Hindu temple at Ayodhya just a year or so ago. And there was a big political kerfuffle over it because Mahendra Modi, who is the Prime Minister of India, the head of the government, showed up to the celebration, which was seen by a lot of people, especially Muslim Indians, as a political statement. That this is truly India, not the mosque, not the non-Hindus, the Christians, the Muslims, the other, This is truly India. And so it caused, a political stir in India when he showed up there to rededicate this temple, this Hindu temple. Okay. That's mentioned in your textbook, and I'm mentioning it now. So this could be seen as part of Hindu revivalism. Okay. Where do we move on from here? Well, it's over an hour, and we're going to start moving into the belief system itself. I want to end with this quotation. This is part of, an interesting quotation, I think. It's from a book by a man called E. Stanley Jones, who was a Christian missionary in India. I think he was Methodist. And he wrote a book on his experiences called The Christ of the Indian Road. And he spoke with this man here, this man whose name is Dwijendranath Tagore. Okay. Not to be confused with I think he had a brother who has another name, Rama something Tagore, who's also quite famous in India. I think he's famous as a poet or something. But this is a picture of the guy he was speaking to, and they were having a conversation one day, and this guy said to him, a penetrating but kindly old philosopher of India, Bharadada, in other words, Dwijendranath Tagore, pronounced this judgment. As we sat in the evening talking for long hours, he thoughtfully said, Jesus is ideal and wonderful, but you Christians, you are not like him. What does that say? Because, people know Jesus Christ through his followers a lot of times. And one of the main obstacles to the spread of Christianity, of course, I think that there's also bias, because it's seen, Christianity is seen as an outsider religion, not truly Indian, whatever. But there is that long history of colonialism where you had white European Christians who basically were oppressing the local native people. They were taking their land from them, their governance, telling them what to do, making them work for them, not enslaving them. There wasn't slavery going on there, but certainly they worked for them. And the Europeans were certainly in control and making all of the decisions. And in that context, trying to also maybe force their religion on these people, using their position of power to force Christianity on people. Maybe not directly. I don't think the vision, I don't think the view is totally negative or dark, or as dark as some people make it. But again, that's another conversation for another cup of coffee. I'm not going to get into that. I just want to respect the views. And this is of the outsider, and this is an outsider. He's a non-Christian. Why is he not a Christian? Because you Christians don't act like Jesus. If you act, I guess the inference is, or the implication rather is, if you acted like Jesus, then India would come to you. We would come to you. But you don't act like him. They recognize Jesus as a wise man, as a good man, but they can't recognize him in his followers. Okay, enough said about that. So we'll continue on getting into the nitty-gritty of the beliefs, the sacred writings of Hinduism at our next class on Tuesday. God bless you all, and have a good day. Turn this off.